Welcome to this short overview presentation on ThinManager. My name's Keith Jones. I work with the ThinManager group inside Rockwell Automation. What I'd like to talk to you today is a historical overview of ThinManager, a kind of a 30,000-foot view of how it works, what it does, and why people purchase ThinManager, what it means for your business. And one of my mantras is seeing is believing. So I'm going to shorten the presentation somewhat and then cut out and demo ThinManager in all its glory. We'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. So first of all, where did ThinManager come from? Well, a company called Automation Control Products began life as a systems integrator. And in the late 1990s, we were doing work with then the fledgling terminal services applications. We realized there was a lot of setup involved, a lot of configuration that added no value, just took up time. And we thought there's a better way to do this. So we stopped being an SI. We invested and we became a product company. And our first release of ThinManager was in 1999. In 2016, we became a Rockwell business inside Rockwell, and we changed our branding only slightly. We continue to develop and maintain ThinManager. Our latest release, 12.0, was a very significant release in December, and we'll have another release in a few months from now. The reason I go through that is really just to say that ThinManager is a product that is designed from the ground floor for the needs of automation. You won't find it in banks and schools. You won't find it in offices unless they're automation related or industrial businesses. But ThinManager is unique in that regard. And it shows from our customer base. We have a lot of varied customers globally in all sorts of industries. And another thing about ThinManager is a very agnostic product when it comes to vertical adoption. Just about anywhere there is an automation system requirement, we'll find an installation of ThinManager somewhere in that field. So let's talk about what ThinManager is. I won't read this slide, but ThinManager is a software tool. It gives us the ability to configure, to manage, to organize and control systems with thin client devices, servers, applications, users in a terminal services based environment. And we know things can go wrong in an automation solution. So one of ThinManager's roles is when something goes wrong, when a server crashes or a network breaks, is to make sure that content that people need is in front of them regardless of the fact of a system failure. So I see it as a content delivery tool. And by content, I mean just about anything that needs to be in front of a user to do his work in an automation or a production environment. Typically an HMI, such as FactoryTalk View or another vendor's HMI. It could be an MES solution or a management solution or a maintenance solution. But it could also be web content. It could be content from other devices, such as streaming video feeds like cameras or panel views, or it could even be content from another ThinManager terminal itself. We manage and deliver this content in three distinct ways. Firstly, by device. We deliver content applications to thin clients or zero clients, to mobile devices, iPads or Android tablets, whatever, and even to computers themselves. The next, we deliver it by user or by user role. A manager will want to see different information than an operator. A maintenance person will again need different types of information. So we know who somebody is, we know what group they're in, and we can deliver the content to them based upon that. And lastly, and uniquely so, we can resolve somebody's location inside our infrastructure and deliver the content to them without them having to actually do anything. A manager who may want KPIs can walk from line 1 to line 2, and on his mobile device, he'll get the KPIs for the location that he's in. A maintenance guy may need to service a motor, and they can go to that motor with a mobile device, scan a QR code, get the documentation and the workflow procedures and everything needed to maintain that device. So ThinManager's role is to safely and securely deliver information and content to any combination of those three facets. And why we do this, I look at a typical automation network. I may have a plant floor or process area. I may have offices associated with the plant floor, engineering offices. I may have a control room. And in each of those areas, typically we'll find computers, PCs. And each PC, of course, needs an operating system. And it needs the applications that it's going to be doing its work, its job for. It will also require, these days, support software. It will have, of course, moving parts, a hard drive or a fan. And it will also have access where potential problems can be injected into the system. And when you multiply that by the 50 or 100 or whatever number terminals you've got around your plant, that becomes quite a bit of a maintenance challenge. So ThinManager's goal is to say this is a better way of doing things. First of all, to get rid of the PCs themselves. We don't need them. Now, you don't have to throw every PC out at once to do this. You can do this in a close managed hybrid manner. But what we do is we install our servers we're going to use in a nice clean environment, not on the plant floor anymore. We install the applications that we need on those servers. So instead of installing on every device around the plant, we're just installing on a few servers. And everything gets managed by ThinManager. So from a central interface, we can control and configure and command every aspect of our environment. And this slide here, although it's a little bit noisy, really just summarizes what I said. We have applications and content that originate for systems in red, and they need to go to users and devices in green. ThinManager is the tool that enables us to configure the delivery of that content. It's not a bottleneck. It's not doing the delivery itself, as you'll see in a short while. Now, I've spoken about thin clients and I mentioned the word zero client. And I just want to clarify some of the terms that we use here, because ThinManager's name came, of course, from thin client management. But what we term a zero client is really what we're after managing. A zero client is an endpoint device, typically will have no operating system or firmware, no hard drive, no SSD, usually industrially robust, depending on where it's going to be located. It can have a much smaller footprint, and you'll see as we go into the security section later, far better inherent security by design. There are two main options for thin clients when it comes to ThinManager. What we call ThinManager ready clients are devices which have a ThinManager BIOS installed in them. They're made by Rockwell and a few selected partners. Whereas ThinManager compatible clients are your off-the-shelf versions. You may want a specific device for, say, an explosion-proof environment that Rockwell doesn't manufacture. Well, you can find a compatible client from another manufacturer. Dozens and dozens of manufacturers make devices from commercial grade units through to industrial specialized units that will manage with ThinManager. And we do keep a list of devices on our website. It's not exhaustive. A lot more devices exist in the field. Rockwell has a complete range of thin client devices. These are all industrial grade devices, and starting at the left, we start with single display units with a single network port connection, and it's including our brand new 6300 device we've just launched. We have integrated panels, we have dual display units, and at the right hand side, we have our behemoth, which is capable of managing up to 7 simultaneous 4K displays on a single unit. Okay, so how does ThinManager work? Well, from the user's experience, he powers on the device, something happens, and then the applications are on the screen in front of him. But behind the scenes, there's a little bit more going on. Let's look at that. Here's a couple of thin clients. One's got 3 monitors attached, one's a single monitor device. I can have any number of servers around my network where I've got applications installed. On 1 or 2 of these servers, I'll have ThinManager installed also. On one of these servers, maybe we'll also have a Microsoft license management system that's part of the remote desktop infrastructure. So when a thin client powers on, remember it has no intelligence. It can't boot without assistance. So what it does is it looks for and discovers the ThinManager server. The ThinManager server recognizes the device and downloads into it a short payload of configuration information, of drivers, of framework OS that device is going to need to do its work. It takes about 45 seconds to a minute for that operation. Once that's happened, ThinManager can step back. The device is more autonomous. The device knows what it's got to show to its user, and it sends requests to start sessions to the servers where the applications are located. The servers check with Microsoft that they're happy they've got CALs or client access licenses, and there the applications are delivered to the screen. Why ThinManager? Why should I spend my money on ThinManager? When I'm in business, I spend money, I need to get a return on investment. And the return on investment with ThinManager comes from several areas. I'm going to talk about each of these, but I'm going to put a special emphasis on the security aspect towards the end. So first of all, using ThinManager and thin client devices greatly increases the inherent reliability of your system. You're moving the processing away from the production areas where machines can be damaged or fail to a central location off the production floor. Inside ThinManager, we've got the ability to provide failover and redundancy in case the server fails or in case the network breaks. And if it's a crucial process, we have a technology called instant failover, so that should a server crash, then within a second we'll put the application back in front of the user from a backup machine. We're replacing the PCs with the hard drives with the solid state units, and I use 3 to 5 years as an average lifetime of a PC in a plant, whereas 7 to 10 years or even more for a thin client device. We've got a lot more increased control. We centrally manage everything from the ThinManager user interface. So we configure everything there, and then we can deploy it to the terminals and the endpoint devices that we need. We deploy or deny only the applications that the users need. We don't need to see somebody with a desktop when all they need is an HMI. We certainly don't want to see anything else installed on the system, so we only deliver the content that is needed to the terminal. We enable shadowing, which is a very powerful ThinManager technology, enabling me to take one screen anywhere in my infrastructure and place it on any other screen anywhere else. And I can also, inside my ThinManager user interface, shadow a terminal. So if an operator is having a problem and he's a mile away, I can call his screen to mine. I can see what he's typing. I can see where his mouse is, and I can help him, guide him through that problem. We have remote management everywhere across the network, and we get real-time feedback in the ThinManager interface. Using ThinManager can also help us decrease our own overall cost of energy use, because the thin clients themselves will use typically 10 to 15% of the energy of a PC. Consider a control room with, say, 20 PCs, each running at 100 watts. That's 2 kilowatts of power. It's also 2 kilowatts of cooling, 2 kilowatts of UPS if necessary. So we can reduce that to about 100, 150 watts using thin client devices. ThinManager can also significantly decrease our operational management costs. This is the largest cost of anything once an automation system is up and running. By using mainframe technology, we have 4 or 5 servers for, say, 100 industrial users on our plant, instead of 100 PCs. If I had the PCs and an urgent security patch came out, I'd have to go physically to each one of those machines at a time that was friendly to the process and upgrade it and put it back in service. In ThinManager's world, all I'll do is go to a server, check a box to take it offline. When a server is offline, the ThinManager delivers the content from a backup machine. So I patch that server, I bring it up to speed and test it out, and then I put it back online and I rinse and repeat that in a 9 to 5 operation on the remaining handful of servers that I've got. Thin clients are maintenance free. There's nothing to manage inside the devices whatsoever. We can also enable upgrades to be done in parallel without taking plants down for an FAT. So if you're doing a system upgrade, maybe taking out an old HMI and replacing it with a new one, or upgrading one older version to a new one, then you can run both systems on a ThinManager side by side, comparing the two. And when you're happy that the FAT is successful, you can switch them over. They are very robust, but if one does fail and needs to be replaced, then it's a very rapid and cost-effective way of doing it. This is a customer of mine. It's a real-world customer, a plant in South Africa that makes really horrible stuff. They had 50 PCs, and because of the environment, the lifetime was quite short, 2 years on average. So every fortnight you've got a failure. When a failure occurs, engineer has to get a new PC from stores, put an image on it or install the OS, bring it up to date, take it to where the failed unit is, replace it, put it in service and test it out. It was about an 8-hour job for that engineer. And whilst that was going on, the plant is operating in some manner of a reduced efficiency because that PC was doing work. If a thin client fails, then first of all, a technician can replace a thin client. Get a new one from the stores, take it down to where the failed unit is, pull all the cables out of the new one, plug them out of the old one, plug them into the new one and power it on. ThinManager will detect a device it's never seen before, and it will ask you what you want to do. You can identify the device you're replacing. It'll be there as a disconnected device in the ThinManager screen, and say reconnect, and that's it. 10 minutes later, your operator has got his visualization back. And in that 10-minute or so of downtime of the device, your process software has still been running on the servers. So any historization or any processing requirements has not been impacted in any way whatsoever. ThinManager has got a lot of ways where we can enable us to reduce the risk of security breaches. Here's a list of good practices that everybody carries out, and ThinManager can assist in each and every one of these elements. I'm just going to concentrate on a few, but reducing the attack surface. So intentionally or unintentionally, where somebody wishes to cause damage to your system. We're centralizing the applications on the servers, so they're not out there. The systems are not out there to be attacked. We can obscure the credentials that we use from operators. We have built-in password secured and encrypted protocols that we use. The devices themselves have no hard drives. The thin client, if it's disconnected and stolen, it becomes a brick. So there's no intellectual property to be lost. There's no licenses to lose, databases, proprietary algorithms. And if somebody does come along to a ThinManager device with a USB key laden with viruses and plugs it in, absolutely nothing can happen. It's not even part of the network in the same manner of a typical desktop machine. We also integrate authentication with your Active Directory. We can manage access groups with permissions to access assets, assets being terminals, assets being displays, etc. Anything that needs to make sure that the right person gets the right information. Multi-factor authentication, card readers, fingerprint readers, so something you have plus something you know, password. To enable external hardware on a device, for example, to add a bad reader, you need to be a ThinManager administrator. So nobody can just walk up to a device, plug something in, and get any mileage out of that. And lastly, life cycle management. We drastically reduce that. ThinManager has a history of providing backward support way back to version 3 of ThinManager. A thin client device can still run on the latest version of ThinManager. By enabling us to patch or upgrade just a few servers instead of a lot of client devices, we're drastically reducing the effort there. So patching, as I mentioned in the example before, very easy. But also considering over the last 10 years, you would have had PCs out on a plant going from Windows 95, Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 10, and a few flavors in between that nobody mentions anymore. You would not have to have ever touched those devices. I have one customer in my particular area who has been running some old thin client devices for probably 15 years without having to change them at all. And you don't have to take any system down to do a migration. We can migrate in place without having to have a downtime cycle on the plant. So with that, what I want to do now is to get out of the presentation slides for a while, and I'm going to connect into a ThinManager environment on a remote desktop server. So here I have one of my remote desktop servers in my network, and this is where ThinManager is installed. I open the user interface here. So you can see the user interface is fairly simple, has some sections that I can select down the bottom. It has some context-sensitive information around the top and on the right-hand side, and a simple menu and ribbon bar. I'm going to talk about 3 of these sections in detail, but before I do that, I'll review the 3 that we really don't have time for today. The first one of these is the ThinManager server. When I select the ThinManager server, I can see all of the ThinManager servers in my system. This is not just the remote desktop servers where my applications are. These are specifically where the ThinManager services are installed. Both of those servers are green, which makes me happy. The next section we'll talk about is users. This is where I can give my users and my user roles permissions to do things or to access content within ThinManager. Typically, these are linked to real Active Directory people or Active Directory roles. Lastly, locations. I have a number of locations defined around my system. I can actually have terminals assigned to locations, or I can have content assigned to locations. So first of all, in detail, I'm going to start to look at our display servers. Display servers are our sources of content, and there are 4 different categories here. The first one, remote desktop servers, I have 3 defined. This is where my applications are going to be run, which I'm going to take the content from those applications and deliver them to the Thin client. Other servers, cameras, IP cameras, or USB connected cameras can be used. VNC servers for devices like panel views, which have a video serving capability. And new in version 12, container hosts. These are systems where I can locate container applications. So this Dock1 system is a physical computer on my network, and on that system I have containers, Docker containers, which I can download and run content from natively inside my Thin client. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the section coming up on display clients. Next, I want to look at terminals. This is our endpoint destination devices. I have 2 groups of terminals defined here. So I can put properties on groups and inherit them down to the devices in there. My wireless group has a simple iPad defined, and my wired group has 2 devices defined, one of which, the VersaView 5200, is in green. I'm going to look at that terminal in detail by selecting it. I can see in the right-hand pane its configuration information. I can see anything that is specific to that terminal in the way of modules, for example, a keyboard or an RFID card reader. And then most importantly, I like to look at the shadow tab. This shows me exactly what is on that terminal. So I can see in real time what the operator is seeing. Okay. This particular terminal has got what we call a virtual screen display client assigned to it. We're going to look at that in detail in a little minute. But I've got the ability in this screen here also to interact with the content on the terminal. So I'm clicking in the right-hand smaller applications and doing a swap operation with those applications into the main screen. So let's look now at display clients. Display clients are where my content is defined. I'll be talking about a couple of these in detail, but the major ones you'll deal with are typically remote desk services display clients. You can see here I have several dozen of them, which are actually application definitions where my applications reside that I want to place onto a thin client screen. I also have camera display clients so that I can format how my camera images from my camera servers are laid out. Terminal shadow display clients means I can create a shadow definition to place one screen from any device on my network onto another screen, or maybe into a control room. The workstation display client is a client that enables me to define a PC and place that PC's user interface, maybe Windows 7, Windows XP, Windows 10, onto a thin client device. The VNC display client simply maps to the VNC servers that I've defined, where I can add some more attributes. And the container host display client is where I define the applications coming from the container host system itself. So here I've got two defined, the first two delivered with system ThinManager 12.0, Firefox and Terminal. So those display clients can run in a container somewhere, either on the network or inside the thin client itself. So I would no longer, for example, have to have a browser running on a server and then place that browser content on the thin client. I can download the container into the thin client and run it natively. And lastly, the virtual screen display client gives me the ability to define the versatile displays that we've seen. I'm going to go into the configuration that I had shown in the terminal. It's overview 1920. And like with everything in ThinManager, everything is configured with wizards. I don't have any files to edit or scripts to write. So when I open the wizard for this display client, so by simply double clicking it, I get all of the parameters and attributes. So I can give it a name. I can set some options on how I want it to behave on screens. And this is where I've defined the actual layout of the virtual screen. So you see 5 different sections there. They're all named. If I select the main one, it has a display client called Cookie Demo 1920. If I select the top right, it has Instant Fizz. And if I look at the screen options, this is where I configured the swap option. So on the mouse button, left mouse button, do a swap, and the swap destination is the main section. So let's go back to our terminal and let's do some configuration of the device itself. So again, I double click the icon and it opens the terminal's wizard. I can see its name. I can give it any name I like. I can select, when I'm configuring it, from a list of known manufacturers and devices, or I can just make it a generic terminal, which means it's going to be off the shelf and do a Pixie boot terminal. This particular terminal is a Rockwell device and it's recognized it. It has a unique ID. Some more options on behavior, replacement, scheduling, shadowing, security, multi-monitor, login methods that this terminal will accept, and then the display clients that are on that device itself. So this is where I added the Overview 1920 display client to the device. I'm going to take that off by simply double-clicking that, and I'm going to add a very simple display client called Calculator. Other options I don't need to change. So now my VersaView will reflect the fact that it has a calculator configured, and I'll shortly see that there is an exclamation mark there with a pending change. If I look on the Shadow tab, I'll still see the existing applications. I don't want to alarm an operator by messing around with a terminal he's using until he's ready. So I'm going to tell ThinManager now to stop what the terminal is doing and to send it the new configuration. It sends that command, and I'll see it change color as the configuration is loaded into the device, and it goes back to a green color. And then the device is showing the calculator, and nothing but the calculator. There's no start menu available on this device. It's in an interactive shadow, which means I can click inside the calculator and do things. I can close the calculator, but that's not going to do me much good because ThinManager says, nope, that calculator needs to be on the screen, so put it back. Now let's do a little bit more interesting than the calculator. Let's take that off. Let's put on the cookie demo application that was running in the main display. Let's put on an asset center display. Let's also put on the Instant Fizz panel view application. And let's also put on a KPI. Okay, so those 4 applications are now on the device. Let's do a restart. And the applications are all shown now on the screen. There's the cookie demo that is running. You can see it's green, it's on the screen. The others are yellow. It means they're running on this terminal. They're just not on the screen right now. I can pull them to the screen by pulling down, for instance, the drop down for the KPI. Or I can even tile these applications, showing there all 4 applications simultaneously in real time. If I select any one of them, it will bring it to full screen. So let's quickly go back and reset this terminal. Back to the virtual screen. And there, after a short delay, we see all of the applications that are existingly running on the machine. The 3 HMI applications and the video feed. And so I hope that short presentation and more importantly the demo has given you a good idea of how valuable ThinManager can be in an automation solution and how easy it is to configure and construct a solution based upon thin client technology, mobile technology, and ThinManager. I just want to summarize a few points. Remember, ThinManager's purpose-built for automation, content management, content delivery solution for manufacturing. It's an OT-centric solution. You don't require IT to configure or make changes to your system. You can do this very straightforwardly using the ThinManager user interface. As you've seen, hopefully, it's very simple to deploy and manage, and it is the only end-to-end solution available that manages everything from the servers all the way down to the thin client hardware itself. We've got a very flexible licensing model that my partners at NHP will be very happy to talk to you about. But I hope really more than anything, this has given you an appetite for more detailed information on ThinManager. We have a good team of people available for you for this. There's also online reference material that you can help yourself to. ThinManager.com is probably the best place to go for this. You can download the product, you can download a license which will run for 30 days, and you can use the website to get some training. So again, thank you very much for your time.